All right. So, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of you wherever you are. Today's webinar is about resilience insights. What we are seeing in the market, what we have been hearing, or what the market is saying in general with respect to cloud resilience, and also morphing that conversation towards cyber resilience this year. So we will see some of the insights of how the customers and partners are trying to combine the security aspects of resilience, which is proactive component of resilience, and the reactive component of resilience with respect to IT resilience. The reactive component is the recovery part of it. A brief introduction to me, as well as Appranix here. I am Govind Rangasamy, founder and CEO of the company. We typically run through these webinars once a month, depending on the type of topics that we come across, which might be useful for a number of our customers and partners. Second, on the Appranix side, Appranix is a Gartner cool vendor. We write on Forbes about cloud resilience, and also you might find a number of other organizations recognition as well. There are a number of articles written in the on across all these magazines or news outlets with respect to cloud resilience, and you will find interesting topics with respect to how uh, the cloud environments are getting recovered and so on. Now, when it comes to cloud resilience, not everyone really understands that it is a shared responsibility model. And the common misconception that we come across in the market is that as soon as organizations go to the cloud, the resilience component of those applications are taken care of by the provider. In this particular case, could be an infrastructure provider like AWS, Microsoft Azure, or Google Cloud Platform, and many others, are SaaS providers such as Salesforce and so on. And as the market understood over a period of time, these providers have been clarifying what is resilience and what part of resilience they take care of, and what part of resilience is offloaded to the customers themselves. Case in point is Salesforce. When they started the cloud SaaS, cloud for ERP and other in it, the platform itself expanded tremendously. When customers put in their data, they understood, or at least they had that understanding, that Salesforce backed up everything. But that wasn't the case. After 15 years, people came to know that Salesforce data, Salesforce customer data, is customers' responsibility. Similarly, when you go and use the infrastructure and your applications running on that infrastructure on AWS and Azure and so on, it's a shared responsibility model. The cloud provider takes care of the responsibility for resilience of the cloud, meaning the compute, storage, database, and 100 other services will have their own SLAs, meaning the ability to recover the compute is based on the SLA advertised by the provider, 99.95, 99.99. And every one of these services has its own SLA. Now, the biggest question, if you are responsible for the applications, business side of the SLA, then that responsibility, meaning the responsibility for resilience in the cloud, belongs to you. So that's a nice shared responsibility model. We continue to kind of put this up just to clarify what customers need to be aware of. Now, that's when the situations like ransomware attacks happen, which means that potentially, not necessarily just the infrastructure failures and things like that, a much bigger problem might be occurring as well in your environment, and that would be ransomware. And ransomware is one type of malware. There are other types of malware, but ransomware has been growing in the capabilities, and there are many different varieties of ransomware. It's to a point where we can see one of those attacks that took down Clorox systems uh, ended up costing them almost like $356 million. And you can also see that the number last year alone exceeded almost $1 billion in terms of payments. So that's huge number depending on who gets attacked and so on. The Clorox incident is not about the payment that they made to the ransomware attacker. It is the overall impact on their business because of the cyber attack. And also, there are other numbers. I mean, you can type in ransomware, you'll get so many of these data points and the type of incidents that might be happening in your region, right? Overall, ransomware attacks against the industrial organization have increased roughly 50% in 2022, and I'm sure it is much more in 2023. And then I am seeing almost an attack, or at least on the news, an attack every week in 2024. So it's a question of when, not a question of if, right? Now, particularly on the cloud platforms, the attacks have increased. And this is based on the CrowdStrike 2024 attack report. If you look in the details, I mean, there are so many data points from this report. I strongly advise to go and take a look at this particular report from CrowdStrike. But there are three numbers that really make a big difference, particularly on the cloud platforms. And the cloud platform attacks are increasing, right? And the rate at which it's increasing is enormous. You can see 110 percentage of increase, which is doubled compared to 2022 in 2023. And you can also see the rate of increase on the cloud agnostic way of approaching, the entire environment type of situation. The rate of increase hasn't changed, has come down, but the number of attacks have increased as well overall. So you can see the difference between 2022 numbers and 2023. The picture is not good, right? And on top of that, if you look at on the left hand side, this is another report. This is from Google Mandiant, another well-known provider of security services, and Google acquired them a few years ago. If you look at the numbers from Mandiant report uh, on ransomware, again, there are other malware that might be impacting the businesses, but particularly on ransomware, because this is what, at the end of the day, how we as a company, Appranix as a company, can help you in terms of working around or recovering from those type of failures. Now, ransomware typically stays about 5 to 9 days, and the numbers vary. It's called dwell time, and that gives you an idea of how long you need to keep the data uh, in your backup systems at the minimum. I mean, you don't have to really keep it for uh, weeks and months. If your concern is just about ransomware recovery, of course, you might keep the data in the archive storage for much longer time for other purposes through archival system or even backup systems acting as archival systems. But with respect to the ransomware data, it is important that you keep the data at least about 9 days back, right? And minimum. And I wouldn't advise just to go with that 9 days. I would rather keep it for 23 days. And that is another set of numbers that were published a while ago. So if you look at that data, the dwell time roughly gives you the retention time period that you will have to keep in terms of getting a clean copy after the attack, and if you want to recover or rebuild. Particularly, the topic is about rebuild, right? So you can see the numbers on the left hand side, and also on the right hand side, you can see the type of organizations that are getting attacked more and more. Obviously, the state sponsored actors are going after the government systems. And if you look at the financial services, they always get attacked. And the some of the worst things that I have seen is the manufacturing systems, right? Manufacturing gets attacked more and more as well, because and if you think about those systems, you know, since the organizations focus on manufacturing, that get attacked, and utilities and so on. So you'll see various types of these organizations and the type of impact. Now, the biggest question across all of this, if you just layer over on top of these numbers and try to connect the dots, you will understand that the attacks are bad. It is what it is, and hope that we don't get attacked. I mean, knock on wood. That is also just a hope and pray situation, because even if we bought all kinds of security defense solutions, right? The sophistication of the attacks is increasing day by day, and also the speed of attack is another component that you will have to really think about, particularly with respect to the ransomware, is that the speed of encryption has changed tremendously between 2020 and 2023. The encryption speed is unbelievably faster nowadays. So that is one aspect of it. So it's not about the ransomware coming in and waiting there for 5 to 9 days, and then start encrypting all your disks and so on. Because if the encryption takes time, if the disks are much larger, the encryption would obviously take time. But what these guys have really figured out is a way to quickly encrypt those disks, so that everything appears to be completely corrupted, and then they hold you ransom. Now, that number, in terms of ransom wise, whatever the number of days, and the amount of payment that they might demand, uh, is it does vary depending on the region and the type of industry and so on. Another aspect that's happening is that, uh, at least in the US, because of all these big profile attacks, the Communications Commission (SEC) has put a rule saying that if a public company gets attacked, they need to report to SEC within 3 days. So that's a rule, new rule. I mean, this one is a very a double-edged sword type of situation. Imagine that a ransomware gang attacks your organization. If you're a well-known public company and you don't report it, after 3 days, what the ransomware attackers do is that they go and report to the SEC that you have been attacked, and hence you are forced to pay them, because you want to get away from that bad publicity, and obviously all the reputation, real damage to the systems, and hence your top line and the bottom line are all affected. So the numbers vary. It's not $4.54 million as this particular report says. It could be hundreds of millions. It could be less than 4.5 as well. Now, setting that aside, the most important aspect is that how fast can you rebuild? Assuming that there are two scenarios. One, assuming that the attack really happened, the option is to pay whatever they are asking for and then get the keys. So now, if you got the keys, how long does it take for you to restore all the systems? I'm not talking about restoring the data. That is a very crucial component of the discussion. But the most important thing is that the systems, the applications, and perhaps all the infrastructure have to come up to be able to run your applications properly. And hence your business systems will run, and then you can resume your business continuity aspect of it. That is one part. That involves in a way to not just restoring the data, but the ability to rebuild. The second aspect is, let's say if you do not want to pay ransom, and you want to just go and try to rebuild it. The only way to do it is to get hold of the clean copy. Forget about the corrupted copy. One of our customer exactly went through this situation. The encryption happened so fast, but they didn't realize it. They went back to the previous day. That was also corrupted, meaning that they could not bring back the SIM. So they went to the third day when we were able to rebuild everything from that clean data copy. I mean, the data copy was clean. So we were able to rebuild the rest of the systems, almost like 18 different Azure subscriptions, 1,480 resources were rebuilt in an isolated, clean room on Azure, but in this kind of isolated in a different area completely, so that they could continue with their business by running the systems while keeping the attacked environment intact, so that cordoned off and kept it as a red zone area, so that they could do forensics into their environment to make sure that future such attacks wouldn't come through, because they need to now know exactly how the attackers came into the systems, right? They could have come through typically email phishing or some other attack or social engineering attack. It could be any number of ways, but how do you really prevent the future attack? That becomes a huge problem, besides having that ability to quickly come back and run the business. On an average, it is known, again, and on an average situation, it's about 23 days to rebuild your systems. And that's a crazy number, right? And that's where everyone is now noticing it. To start with, AWS has released cloud resiliency competency as of this December, past December, 3 months ago, when they did the announcement at the reInvent, 2023 reInvent. And that is a huge recognition in terms of the resilience of the systems, of the applications running in the cloud on AWS, right? Because they are responsible for the infrastructure services, and so on. But as part of the shared responsibility model, they have put in four areas that need to be properly taken care of. One is resilience design. As part of that resilience design, if you think about the number of services or any type of services that you choose to run, and you need to choose carefully, because assuming that you are running your globally scaling application and critically, it is important that you choose the services appropriately, so that you can go to another region and run it from that region, even if the region is down or the entire environment has been attacked in this particular region, right? So that's very important. Choosing the right services that can help you go and run in another region is very important. So that is one time. It's about the architecture choices that you make. Second architecture choices that you make is the resilience operations part, wherein um, in terms of modifying or even deploying and modifying, both components are involved. Deploying the cloud services and modifying those cloud services to suit your application requirements have to be done properly as well. And the best practice, again, all these competency programs really give you best practices, and the AWS as an organization goes and educates the partners and certifies those partners that have obtained this competency. So in that process, what is understood, if followed properly, that any change that is deployed or change occurred within that environment has to be done in a resilient manner. Make sure that the governance processes exist in terms of enforcing individual developers or the SREs or whoever is taking care of the infrastructure to go through these DevOps pipelines. That way, you have a record of what's changing, and all of that. And that could happen across multiple different DevOps pipelines, right? Not just one pipeline, because there could be one pipeline for building the network, the cloud foundation aspect of it. Other could be at the load balancer level, other could be at the application level, the platform level, and then container level. So there may be layers of these DevOps pipeline. And at the top level, with respect to the SREs and the developers, as being the entire concept being the DevOps, the operational component, at the developer level, there could be hundreds of developers having access to the infrastructure. But how do you really enforce all of this is through proper DevOps pipeline. So resilience operation is very, very key in terms of achieving that level of competence when you are operating applications, business critical applications on the cloud. The most important part is resilience recovery. Because no matter what we do, the level of attacks and the sophistication and the speed of attacks have been increasing over a period of time, right? That's very much clear. So the only thing that we can really ensure is the ability to recover. And that recovery, it has to be resilient in terms of ability to recover. Like, how do I rely on a system to recover my systems, my business critical systems, right? So the resilience recovery is such a key component of this competency program. And that takes almost like 23 different products. So overall, all of this, in order to really understand this competency program, you need to think about like 41 different products and services. And the recovery alone has about 23 different products, right? So you can see backup is a separate product. So backing up your data is critical. So the AWS backup product backs up your data into the same region. So if the attack really happened within the same region, if you're not able to even reach your account, then how would you do? So then you'll end up choosing the disaster recovery component of it, meaning the data, your data, using EDR can be replicated to another region. You could replace AWS with Azure ASR, right? That is also totally fine. But the idea here is to replicate your application data over to another region so that in the case of an attack happening in the primary region or infrastructure failure or the cloud resource failure that could be contained within a particular region, and then you could recover or rebuild your applications in the other region again. All of this, both of these data protection components are just data protection. We are not talking about the other components of your application, the services, and so on. That's why there are 23 different products, including AWS System Manager, that needs to be properly used, configured, and all of that. So that's a huge effort. Now, overall, what's happening is that the disaster recovery as a trend. This is a very interesting thing that I was just curious. I've been curious about this. Disaster recovery has been used as a keyword for such a long time. It's like understood. I add a backup, you immediately say disaster recovery, right? And on the other hand, if you look at cyber resilience and how many people are really searching across the world, this is Google search trend, by the way, you can see a completely different scenario. And of course, the numbers vary. I'm looking at the trend, right? Disaster recovery could be, in terms of sheer quantity of search wise, maybe okay, but that itself is a trend that really matters. And this trend also tells a slightly different story. That story is obviously disaster recovery is not helping with cyber resilience. It's an important component, but there is something more than disaster recovery. And that's what I think the market really understands now. And perhaps this viewpoint will help you. And it is not just the organizations, because the level of attack, in terms of really invoking the government compliance aspect, European Union takes time. And unless there is a huge problem, all the governments, all this individual country governments wouldn't come together under this union to really enforce it. And you cannot kill the commerce by enforcing. So there is some leeway, but they are putting this um, entire regulation and the preamble itself. In there, if you look at the regulation, DORA articles, there are 56 articles, right? Then there are 73 or so preamble in terms of what needs to be done at the higher level, how the enforcements will be done, and who does it, which countries responsible for it, individual country responsibility, as well as the union responsibility, and so on. But boiling all of that together is just six component of it, right? You have to continuously learn and evolve. That is important. Obviously, you have to communicate between not only your organization, internal stakeholders, but also the compliance officers from the union, European Union. So you have to communicate properly. You have to have the proof appropriately. That is all taken for granted. But on your side, from digital operational resilience part of it, where the information and communication technology, they call it as ICT. So if you look at the DORA articles, you will come across ICT all over the place. That's about information technology and communication technology, ICT in general, right? And for ICT, and particularly for financial services, this regulation is going to be enforced starting in about 10 months, which means that you need to be prepared for that to be enforced on your side, and then and you need to become ready for that. Otherwise, there will be a lot of penalties. So, in terms of doing that, if you look at the organization's capability to do frequent recovery tests, if there is anything with respect to the ability to recover, if there is anything that you could do is frequent recovery tests. There's absolutely no way to get around that hard work, right? Without knowing what you can do, there's no point in kind of putting it in a document. I mean, there is always regulations and there is always a way to work around the regulations sometimes. But in the end, if there was an attack, it's going to be in all of our heads on the block, right? It's going to be such an important thing for us to be able to get it. Not only on the European Union side, but also NIST cybersecurity framework has been very, very elaborate and very detailed in terms of what needs to be done from the US side of the equation, and that there are SaaS platforms that really enforce the monitoring or the governance aspect of it. Appranix obviously is part of that in terms of enforcing our own employees, our own processes, our own governance, if you will, to be able to do that. So we comply with NIST, and we, on the other hand, we automatically can again use that to comply with SOC 2, Type 2, with respect to availability as well as security as well. But in all of this, right, um, and if you think about the aspect that is understood, which is the defense part of it, where the identity response and detection has to be done, right? I mean, you cannot escape that. You have to buy and perhaps keep on buying newer areas to protect, right? Even the login IAM areas are now being separated because the attacks are so different. Attack vectors are so different in that. So defense component is very important. So that is covered under identity response and detection, maybe a little bit of the protection part of it. But if every defense fails, it comes down to two things. One is invoking that recovery, cyber recovery aspect of it. Second is that the infrastructure team will get involved. Right? When it comes to infrastructure, particularly on the cloud, I mean, that's not an easy one, right? The infrastructure varies. And here is the difference. Let's say you start the recovery process. Now the question would be, is it going to be just restore or a rebuild? Let's go into the details of this component a little bit, because disaster recovery means restoration of data. That's what people have in mind. For that, the protection is about data volumes. Protect the data volumes under virtual machines. Maybe in some cases protect the virtual machine itself, so just protect the entire thing, right? Virtual machine protection. And then maybe if there are so many critical instances or database instances, you just go and protect the tables, maybe file systems and so on. So now think about it. Let's assume that the protection happened properly, right? And the architecture of the protection could vary. I'm just showing an example of that protection running on the cloud, where you take the data, put it on some kind of a bucket, and lock it, so that call it as immutable lock, immutable vault rather. I'm sorry. So assuming that that already exists, restoration of data back into the environment where the attack happened, I think you know where I'm going with this, right? It's useless, because as soon as you restore the data into another volume, unless you understood where that attack really came from, it's only a matter of perhaps minutes before these new volumes are re-encrypted by that. So we offer another approach. The approach is that rebuild. Can you rebuild? Now the question is how fast you rebuild. So, if you think about it, in terms of building this application, it's a very simple componentry that I'm showing for some, flexible application architecture and so on, a bunch of virtual machines, file systems, and database and so on. Now, if you think about building this application, the right way to think about it, let's say if you were migrating this from on-prem, roughly the entire migration time, production cutoff from on-prem to cloud, would give you a kind of a nice idea about how long it really took for you to build this application. Now, the right way to rebuild it is to, again, go through that process, or is there a better way to do it? Because people are scared about rebuilding, because there are so many components that are involved in terms of rebuilding, right? So we need to be careful in terms of what you can do. So all the rebuild has always been thought of as really complex, because people are scared in terms of migrating and rebuild, that kind of a process, engineering effort, and of course the cost of which, right? The infrastructure cost as well as people cost, and everything. But it is now possible, particularly on the cloud. It is possible. So think about rebuild as opposed to just restoring the data. That's because it's not just about the data disks anymore. If you think about some of the environments that we discover, the number of resources that we discover, could be 1,000 resources or 60,000 plus resources. If you look at the data disks alone, it's about 70% of the resources are not data disks. So in other words, you're only protecting, if you are protect all the data disks, you're only protecting 30% roughly of your environment. I mean, that's a very scary thought, right? If you're protecting only 30 percentage, how do you really recover or rebuild this environment? This is one of those example environments. This is very critical for a financial services customer. So the questions become two. One, are you backing up both your cloud configurations and the data together? This is very important, because if you restore the data, if the applications are at a different point in time, then the application may not even talk to the data or retrieve the right data, right? So you need to make sure that everything is proper, in sync. Now the question becomes, can you rebuild it? Can you rebuild it fast? Because your RTOs, the business continuity demands that your RTO, advertised RTO to your business, if you're responsible for this recovery, it could be 30 minutes or 4 hours. Well, if it is 4 hours, if you think about your SLA, your availability SLAs, if the business needs 99.95 SLA, you could only afford to be down about 30 minutes per month. And you can accumulate over a period of SLAs are like per year, let's say. Nice to assume it's per year. So you can combine all that and say declare a downtime for 4 hours. Right. But that's not really SLA, right? In the age of Amazon.coms of the world, where it continuously runs, As long as you have an internet, you can go and buy stuff. And that's the expectation from the customer. It's not what you deliver, what you could deliver, it's the expectation from the customer. Meaning that if you cannot, your competition is doing it, so customers are going to your competition. So there is some kind of a enforcement happening, pressure from external events. So the question becomes, how fast can you rebuild? If that's the case, then you have resilience, application resilience. Otherwise, you're not. So we explain this in three separate buckets. We'll go into the details of it. But the other aspect of this cloud environment, particularly when we are specializing the cloud environments, is that these environments change frequently. These environments go through several changes per day. Per environment, as there's a rough number, 50 changes per day. I mean, there's always those numbers because people want to see some kind of an estimated quantity. So Gartner comes up with numbers like 50 changes per environment. What that means, your environment is different, my environment is different. But what is important here is that the changes on the cloud environments are frequent and the changes are occurring faster. Two different angles to look at. But the changes are real. More changes because cloud promised agility. I don't have to wait for the service to show up, right? IT is not going to say that, oh, I don't have service, you have to wait for it because of which the support ticket is stuck. There is no such thing. You can directly talk to the infrastructure using your code to go and acquire whatever the services that you need so that you satisfy customer requirement directly thanks to DevOps model, right? If you're so advanced in terms of running your applications with that model. And then on top of that, several teams come and just change it. Remember, I mentioned that cloud environments are getting attacked more, and there are reasons for it because it's much more open. And the security teams are 24/7, right? And no wonder CISOs cannot, they get burned out. So they come in and say, so, well, I have to look at the entire set of environment, not just that particular application environment where you might have noticed some kind of an attack. The case in point here is that configuration changes from several of these important people that are really having access to it. On top of all of that, you have chosen to operate on the public cloud, which means that it's a shared responsibility. What that means internally is that cloud providers have software defined the infrastructure. It's good for them. It's good for you as well because they can deploy some kind of an update through their software and the infrastructure changes. Great. But on the other hand, it also affects, meaning that there are software defined problems on the infrastructure. And so many of them. The size of the circle really denotes the number of incidents that people see depending on the region of the cloud. On top of that, you have this nightmare ransomware type of attacks. The damage is real. So what we are saying as a company, we cannot just go on talking about the problems. And so we also offer a solution, particularly for the cloud application. So we understand that building these distributed cloud applications is hard. Nobody says it's easy, right? Piece of cake. Oh, if that's the case, then everyone would have migrated to the cloud quickly, then operated nicely at a lower cost. Unfortunately, that is not the case. So we understand that building these distributed cloud applications is hard and running them is much harder. Now the question becomes how hard it is to rebuild, because that's what you'll end up doing in terms of an outage or after a ransomware attack. It's about rebuild. So here we are to help you in terms of pretty much simplifying the entire aspect of rebuild, because Appranix codifies all the application cloud resources, the dependencies, the backup replication data, so that you can rebuild quickly. In fact, what we call is a hyper fast, because we need to put a different name for it. Fast doesn't work, speedy recovery doesn't work, rapid recovery doesn't work. Those are all taken care of, are taken over by data restore operations. So we can help you rebuild fast. The way you could think of roughly in order to achieve that, typically, you need to back up the data, replicate the data, and then operate those things as services. Apart from that, you'll have to really think about what are the configurations that really make up your environment. And what that means that you'll have to involve some kind of a cloud management tooling, and then some kind of a sprinkling infrastructure score at different layers, and then script it or code it directly, all of that. And finally, if you are responsible for the SLA of that business system, then you could finally, that's why I put it in orange. I mean, you can never be confident, right? There is some level of assurance, but is it really assurance? Then suddenly an attack comes in, and how do you really do that? Great. And finally, we achieved for one environment. The question becomes, how do you really scale it, right? And it's not just that problem, it's your cloud provider. The cloud provider is changing the infrastructure as well, because they are listening to so many of these millions of customers, and everyone is requesting, and wonderful, they are operating using DevOps principles, which means that the software defined infrastructure on the cloud gets changed faster as well. It's not your data center where you have complete control. So that's the real problem. We simplified it to a point where you could actually now rebuild, right? And you could do it across the topmost cloud providers, be it AWS, Azure, or Google Cloud, and then various services like Kubernetes and so on. So you don't have to install agents, maintenance, run books. We simplified. Take it for granted that for multi-cloud environment at scale, the system is able to do, and we have proven that. There are a number of case studies that we can supply in terms of what is possible. What is possible without having PhDs to do all of this, right? That's what a company like Luxottica has done when the systems went down in Singapore, right? They were able to rebuild really quickly for 1800 plus critical resources, right? So you don't have to worry about, like this particular customer, when they were on-prem, they used to bring like 30 people to a single recovery test, because they, meaning their CFO, has to sign the dotted line, because it's a financial services, that yes, we can protect customer data. Yes, if something were to happen, we can recover the systems that has um, systems that have the customer data, right? And that took roughly at the time 72 hours, 4,320 minutes. Imagine that, right? Uh, and luckily, they moved to the cloud. It's good for them in terms of operating a scalable environment, and also recovering really, really quickly with a single person who knows how to click a button. Of course, that button is very crucial. You need to know where you're firing that, but it comes to that button, and that takes about 32 minutes. In this particular case, four or five different buttons, because there are 5 tiers, and 4 tiers really took like less than 10 minutes, and then one large one about 30 minutes, because 272 terabytes, and the total environment is about 3.985 petabytes, right? So that's the difference. The way we do it, I mean, the crucial thing is that all right, that sounds great, wonderful, looks like you can rebuild it, and my environment is always different, no matter what you do, right? And we are saying the same thing, Mr. Customer, you continue to run the way you are running your cloud environments today, because just because we are coming in, you're not going to change it. We do not want you to change it, because that's too much to change, and just to make sure you get the resilience. So that's crucial. So what we do is that we go and discover all the cloud resources that are associated with your application. We build, this is an output from our system. So we build something called a cloud time machine, which is a dual vault. One is the cloud configuration vault. So all the cloud configurations are backed up continuously, agentlessly. So even if you're scaling, auto scaling, all of that are taken care of. You could also go back and check, what kind of changes are occurring between two timelines. So wonderful. So that properly, mutably backed up on the cloud environment with Appranix. Second, your data, which is crucial. Appranix doesn't take your data. Appranix only moves the data to different regions, because now, because if the attacks are coming in frequently, you need to compress your RPO, the ability to really recover from a clean copy without losing much of your data. So that means that the RPOs need to be shorter. And that pressure has always been there, right? How frequently can you capture the data? Reliably, you can capture the data, incrementally capture the data, and hopefully agentlessly and all of that situation. So capture the data quickly, make it immutable so nobody can modify it, and then put it in a different region so that even if the region goes down, I have a copy that I can recover. So all of that are done by Appranix. So assume that there's a way to backup, there is a way to replicate. All that management is built into the system. Appranix doesn't take your application data. Application data moves application native format, cloud native format, using all the cloud performance, network performance, and so on. So your RPU can decrease. And then now comes to RTO. Appranix Copilot automatically writes a code so that you can press that one button. Appranix takes care of the rest because it writes the code, production ready code at a particular point, because that point, 2 days ago point, is a clean copy of the data. If that is the case, you cannot have a system from today and recover the data from 2 days ago copy. There is no guarantee that the system would run, right? You can always refresh the data from the latest, but you have to make sure that system as of 2 days ago is the clean system along with the data, so you can log in and check the systems are working first. So pretty much Appranix allows you to roll back the clock, to go back to get the clean environment rebuilt using our Copilot. And you have various scenarios associated with it. Now, that's all wonderful. Now, how do I ensure that day in, day out? So the platform also helps you in terms of giving you a live environment clones that you could take periodically and then run the security scanning to make sure that proactively you are monitoring the resilience component of it. Right? One is monitoring using your security defense system right in production, but the attackers are coming through so many ways. So the newer security companies are releasing newer type of systems, and you may not be able to afford to go and change the production all the time. So take a clone of your environment, run through the security scanning properly. We're using some other security scanning solutions, open source or proprietary, whatever you could afford, or you could offload this work to one of our partners that can do this for you. So all of that now are possible, and several other use cases as well. And given that, we don't have to talk about the pricing, but the idea here is that the size of the environment that we protect. A customer is protecting like 39,000 snapshots per day with Appranix. One large SaaS vendor running across multiple continents is protecting that many snapshots, meaning that those are all immutable copies. Right? So you pay one price and you do whatever is necessary for you to protect your environment, and we make it easier for you to procure our SaaS as well. So you can go to any of the your favorite cloud provider and initiate the subscription. So let me stop here and see if there are questions. Otherwise, we'll jump on and do a quick demo as well to show the rebuild capabilities. Right? Pause here and see. I'm not looking at any of you, so I don't know whether you're raising the hands or not. Otherwise, this is recorded fully, so you can pretty much watch it later on. Now, take an example where you have an environment running in one of the regions of the cloud in Northern Virginia. And if you look at the instances, so look at the instances themselves, there are about like 14 instances that are running in the production region, and our application for this particular demo is about 8 instances, right? OpenEMR, and and that depends on so many of the services, including, let's say, the load balancers. Load balancers are here. You can see the load balancers are important for running this particular application because it automatically scales. So OpenEMR application level load balancer, the database systems level load balancers, and so on. So various levels. And then there is databases. Obviously, we for this particular demo, we are using one of the RDSs. And if you think about it, as soon as you have an RDS, you have parameter groups, and one of the parameter groups has about 589 parameters. So the case in point is that the environment is complex, right? It's not the traditional environment wherein you control everything nicely across network, storage, and perhaps the systems, right? The services are too many nowadays. You might be using even DynamoDBs as an example. Now the choice here to be able to kind of achieve a level of resiliency is to run that same setup in the other region, right? You could, based on some of the best practice. The best practice from the provider is that choose your services carefully. So you choose the services that are available within the cloud provider in the other region, but you don't have to actually consume it. If you consume, you're going to pay double the price. But that is just one aspect of it. Even if you ran these services across multiple regions, you are paying for it. Understood, you have money, you can pay for it. But the issue is that if the entire system has been attacked, how do you go back in time, roll back the clock across all this complicated environment? So the right way is that you don't have to actually run it like what I am demonstrating. It may not be applicable for the systems that are super critical, right? 99.99, those systems, yes, you need to have availability as well as recoverability. But other systems, less than that super critical ones, anything with 99.95, you can afford to have this rebuildable system, meaning you don't have to run the infrastructure, you don't have to waste money, and see if Appranix can rebuild it. So what we do, go into Appranix, log in, and go to that system. In this particular case, it's Open EMR. That is the system that we are going to rebuild in California. And if you look at this electronic medical records, and it's managing patients and procedures, all of that, it's running in the the east coast of AWS. So what we are going to do is to protect that, setting aside the nuances of connecting to the cloud environment, putting an assembly to represent OpenEMR. The OpenEMR gets automatically discovered. All the dependencies are identified. All of that gets continuously protected based on the policies that you put in place. Could be 15 minutes, could be an hour, could be daily policy. Everything is incremental. And these policies really enforce the backup using both the dual vaults, one for configurations, another one for the data. And once you put all these one-time work of connecting to the cloud account and getting the assembly, the rest is Appranix. Appranix system automatically protects all that configuration data, the dependencies, the assemblies, and also the data gets replicated from one region to another region, and then you have this RPO, right? RPO is explained in terms of copying the data for backup in the same region and also copying the data to another region as well. So that is done. The remaining thing is that identify the right copy and hit the rebuild button. I'm going into another region here, California, because rebuild Open EMR, right? And I'm going to just press the button and give the permission to rebuild and recover. Hit the recovery button, and then what's happening is that the resources are getting rebuilt in California, right? All of that are coming up in the other region. So the region that is going to be built is cross region, and the entire system will come up in an isolated network. That way now it's kept separately from the production environment. That way you could do the tests as well. Now that is getting rebuilt. A new VPC will come up because the production VPC, see, that is just built, and you can see the network that's getting rebuilt. So we will revisit this particular graph. But the most important aspect is what's happening in terms of rebuild. So the code has been written by Appranix Copilot, and that is spinning out all the resources necessary, right from the network, right, all the way to the systems. And if you look at the code, and if you look at what's getting rebuilt, is the entire OpenEMR application environment, or the clean room, if you will. It's a clean room because assuming that this everything is getting built from the clean data copy and configuration copy, right? All of the dependencies, all of the nuances, the cloud services, everything in sync as of an hour ago, so that you can rebuild the system confidently, reliably every time. And you can run through the tests as well frequently, right? So that's the capability that you could do with Appranix. Again, going back and looking at what we started, we wanted to really go into some of the key things that have happened with respect to cyber resilience, crowd resilience, in terms of insights. So the attacks are increasing. Protect your systems properly, have proper rebuild capabilities so that you can rebuild from the clean copies if something were to happen. So with that, let me stop and see if there are any other questions. Otherwise, we will post this to everyone who registered. That way you can spread the message of all the insights that you see in the market, and then hopefully protect your systems properly. Okay. All right. Um, if there are no questions, usually raise my hand. It's my hand. Again, we are available for any conversation, and I will give you back 2 minutes, 18 seconds. Thank you very much for your time today.